For the past 5 years, it has been just the two of us, my husband George and me, living quietly in our small house in Vermont. George has been bedridden since the stroke, and I have been his sole caregiver. Last month, I felt my own strength finally begin to fail me. My back ached, my legs grew weak, and the daily tasks of caring for him had become an almost insurmountable challenge. It was then that our eldest son Michael, who lives in Boston, called and said, "Mom, come live with us." A faint hope flickered within me. At last, I thought, we can be surrounded by family in our final years. With that fragile expectation warming my heart, I packed our heaviest belongings, folded George's wheelchair, and made the long drive to our son and his wife's home in the city suburbs. My name is Evelyn Miller, and I am 86 years old. It was late in the afternoon on the day we arrived. I had just managed to get George settled and had finally sunk into a chair, letting out a long, weary sigh. In that very moment, my daughter-in-law Sarah walked into the living room. She stood over us, a cool expression on her face, and stated her terms with perfect clarity. "George, Evelyn," she said, her voice crisp and businesslike. "From now on, we'll need $300 from each of you for groceries every month. Please make sure you pay me at the beginning of the month, so you don't forget." For a second, it felt as if time itself had stopped. My husband lay on the daybed, his eyes quietly closed. I felt the words catch in my throat, but I managed to find my voice and answered her calmly. "Of course, dear. I understand," I said, "but I have one small request. Would it be possible for us to see an itemized list of the expenses each month?" I felt the air in the room turn to ice. My son, Michael, stood by the doorway, his gaze fixed on the floor, unable to say a word. Sarah's eyebrows twitched, just for a moment, into a tight frown. That evening, I went to the kitchen to prepare some soft oatmeal for George. As I stood at the stove, stirring the pot, I heard my daughter-in-law's voice from behind me. "We're having a regular dinner tonight," she said, not unkindly, but with an unmistakable edge. "If you need to make oatmeal, please wait until after we're done using the kitchen. And you'll need to clean up after yourself, of course." "I understand," I replied, forcing a smile to my lips. But inside, my heart was a tangled mess of emotions. Through the kitchen window, I could see the city lights twinkling in the distance. The view was beautiful, but its beauty felt like a sharp pang in my chest. At dinner, my grandson, Leo, slid into the chair next to me and whispered, "Grandma, why did you come here?" "Because I wanted to be with you, sweetie," I answered, patting his hand. As I spoke, my eyes drifted over to George. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head and closed his eyes. A quiet tear welled in my own eye and slid down my cheek. A few days later, a piece of paper appeared on the refrigerator, held by a magnet. In Sarah's neat, precise handwriting, it read, "Household rules. Utilities, water, electricity, gas, to be split evenly. Consumables, toilet paper, paper towels, etc. to be purchased by each party for their own use. Groceries, top shelf of the refrigerator is for Mom and Dad, bottom shelves are for us." I could only stare at the list, stunned by its rigid formality. One afternoon, as I was changing George's clothes and helping him with his adult diaper, I heard Sarah muttering to herself in the hallway, "This is like living in a nursing home." Her words struck me like a physical blow. George couldn't speak, but his eyes filled with tears, and his hand tightened around mine, squeezing with all his might. That night, lying in my bed in the guest room, I let out a soft sigh into the darkness and asked myself a question that had been forming in my mind for days. Am I really part of this family? A week passed. Sarah approached me with a meticulously detailed list of expenses and a folder full of receipts. "Your payment for this month is $20 short," she announced. Silently, I took an envelope from my purse, removed a $20 bill, and handed it to her. In that moment, the feeling was overwhelming. I was no longer a mother or a grandmother in this house. I was merely a boarder, a tenant. The anxiety I had been trying to suppress swelled up from the depths of my heart, threatening to consume me. "I'm so sorry," I murmured. "I'll get it to you right away." That night, As I sat by George's bedside, watching his peaceful, sleeping face, I made a quiet resolve. The next morning, I asked everyone to gather in the living room. I walked in holding the bank book I had carefully maintained for over 50 years. Everyone, I began, my voice steady, if our presence here is truly a burden, then please, take this. It is our entire life savings. But I ask you to make one promise in return. If you accept this, you must treat us with the love and respect of family, from the bottom of your hearts until the very end. If you cannot do that, then we will find somewhere else to live. The room was silent. Everyone stared, breathless. Michael's eyes filled with tears that soon streamed down his face. Leo ran to me and threw his arms around my waist, burying his face in my dress. Sarah simply stood there, her head bowed, her gaze fixed on the floor. From that day forward, the atmosphere in the house began to change, slowly but surely. Michael started to actively help me with his father's care, lifting him when I couldn't, talking to him for hours about his own workday. Even Sarah began to speak to me with a genuine smile, asking about my day, offering me a cup of tea. I realized then that it was right to have spoken up, to have fought for my place, for our dignity. One night, just before he went to sleep, Leo came to my room and said softly, "Grandma, I'm really glad you came to live with us." Those 2 weeks taught me a profound lesson. Family cannot be measured in dollars and cents, or by rules written on a piece of paper. It is built on something far more precious: compassion, understanding, and dignity. I smiled at my grandson. "Thank you, sweetie," I whispered back. "I'm glad to be here too. My name is Evelyn Miller, and I am 86 years old. For most of my life, I was a nurse. I worked in a small clinic in our town in Vermont, a place where you knew every patient by name. I spent my days tending to people's pains and sharing in their joys. My life, a quiet accumulation of small, meaningful moments. My husband, George, was a master carpenter, the best in town. The sweet, sharp scent of wood always clung to his clothes, and the rhythmic scrape of his hand plane was the constant soundtrack of our neighborhood. I can still see his hands, strong and sure, as they crafted sturdy beams for a new house or carved an intricate detail into a mantelpiece. Those hands were filled with both gentleness and pride. Every morning I would wake a little before the sun. I'd go to the kitchen, fill the kettle, and pour the hot water over a tea bag in my favorite mug. I'd stand there for a moment, breathing in the warm, fragrant steam. It was my way of greeting the day. Outside our kitchen window is a small yard. In one corner, under the shade of an old maple tree, sits a wooden bench that George built for me when he was still strong and healthy. It has weathered over the years, but it's still sturdy. Looking at that bench while I sipped my morning tea, I would whisper to myself, "Another day is beginning." This has been my ritual for as long as I can remember. Our little garden changes with the seasons. In the spring, bright yellow daffodils would pop up along the fence. In the summer, the hosta leaves would be a deep, lush green glistening with morning dew. Our life was simple. Never what you would call wealthy, but we were rich in other ways. Every evening, without fail, we sat down to dinner together. We'd eat side by side, listening to the news on our old radio, talking about relatives who lived far away, or sharing memories from when we were young. And on the coldest winter nights, we would climb into bed, hold hands under the warm quilt, and whisper, "It's cold tonight," before breaking into quiet laughter. That was our happiness. Our house held nothing of great monetary value, but it was filled with the small, daily warmth that was the greatest treasure of our life together. But 5 years ago, that peaceful life came to an abrupt end. One morning, George turned to me and mumbled, "Evelyn, something feels wrong." A moment later, he collapsed onto the floor. The diagnosis was a severe stroke. It left his entire left side paralyzed, and it stole most of his words. From that day on, my life was turned upside down. I learned to be his arms and his legs. I helped him with everything: eating, dressing, bathing. Our life became a cycle of trips to the hospital and back. I had handrails installed throughout the house and a ramp built over the front steps. I learned to cook soft foods that he could easily swallow. There were nights when I had to turn him in bed every few hours to prevent sores, nights when exhaustion brought me to tears. But George, in his soft, slurred voice, would comfort me. "Just having you here is enough," he would say. He was the man who had once carried massive beams of timber on his shoulders, wiping the sweat from his brow and declaring with a proud grin, "This is what it means to be a craftsman." That image is burned into my memory. He was a man who stood tall and confident on scaffolding, no matter how hard the rain fell or the wind blew. But the man he is now spends his days lying in a bed, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. He has to rely on my hands for everything, from getting a drink of water to changing his clothes. He often smiles at me, a shy, almost embarrassed smile, and says, "Sorry about all this." But I can see the deep well of sadness and frustration hidden behind that smile. One afternoon, I walked into his room quietly and saw him wiping a tear from the corner of his eye with the back of his good hand. When he noticed me, he quickly tried to force a smile. "It's nothing," he said, but his shoulders seemed to slump, and he looked so small, so vulnerable in that big bed. The frustration of being unable to do anything for himself. The sorrow of a strong man made helpless. It was a heavy burden for him to carry, and the helplessness I felt, only being able to watch him bear it, was a dull ache that spread through my own heart. Our pensions were modest. We got by, carefully, by dipping into the $300,000 we had managed to save over. A lifetime of hard work. The simple moments, sitting together by the window, sipping tea, and watching the seasons change the colors of the mountains and the flowers in our garden. Those became my small, precious joys. But as the years passed, my own body began to betray me. Just the other week, as I was trying to move George from his bed to the wheelchair, a sharp, searing pain shot through my lower back. I froze, unable to move for several minutes, the world turning gray around the edges. That incident prompted the phone call from Michael in Boston. "Mom, you can't keep doing this," he said, his voice full of concern. "It's too much for you. Come and live with us. If we all pitch in to help with Dad, it'll be easier on everyone." His words were a comfort, a lifeline. But beneath the gratitude, a seed of doubt was planted. Could we really, all of us, live together peacefully? When I talked it over with George, he just nodded slowly. "Evelyn," he whispered, "you don't have to push yourself so hard anymore. As long as I'm with you, it doesn't matter where we are. We'll be all right." And so, we made the decision to leave the home where we had spent nearly 60 years of our lives. Packing up was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. My hands trembled as I wrapped our old china, a wedding gift from so long ago. The familiar scent of the old wooden floors, the way the afternoon sun slanted through the living room window in the autumn, every nook and cranny was filled with a memory. With each box I sealed, I felt like I was sealing away a piece of my life. I found myself whispering to the house, to the furniture, to the trees in the garden. "Thank you, I'm sorry. Goodbye." I fought back tears with every word. As the car pulled away, I saw George through the window, his hand raised in a small, weak wave. I looked back one last time and made a silent vow. I will never forget the life we built here. I will never forget these days. My heart was a whirlwind of emotions, fear of a new life, confusion about my own aging body, and above all, the immense weight of that simple phrase, living with family. On our very first day in Boston, before I had even finished unpacking our suitcases, Sarah came to me. She was holding a thick notebook and a few sheets of paper. "Evelyn," she began, her tone efficient and clear, "this is a household ledger. From now on, I need you to record everything you use. Groceries, utilities, and consumables like toilet paper and laundry detergent. Please keep all your receipts and tape them in here. We'll settle up on the first of every month." She explained in painstaking detail how I was to log every kilowatt of electricity, every gallon of water, every roll of paper towels. Since we're family now, this seems a bit like being a boarder, doesn't it? Wait. The thought flashed through my mind, but I pushed it down and took the notebook with a polite smile. "I understand," I said, but each word she spoke felt like a tiny, sharp needle piercing my heart. The moment that ledger was in my hands, a chilling thought took root. Am I no longer the mother in this house? Have I become a lodger? I was supposed to have been welcomed as family, but here I was, faced with the reality that every aspect of my existence in this house would be accounted for, recorded on a balance sheet. A profound sadness washed over me. I felt as if I had lost my place in the world. Michael was in the kitchen, unpacking boxes, but he didn't look in our direction. I let out a small, quiet sigh and went back to George's side. He had his eyes closed, but he opened them slowly as I approached. "What's wrong?" I asked softly. In a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Evelyn, are we really part of their family? Or are we just a burden?" I squeezed his hand and replied, "Don't be silly, but deep down." I was wrestling with the very same fear. Late that night, after I had tended to George, I sat alone in the quiet of my room and opened the notebook. Oil used in the kitchen today? Water? 1 load of laundry? I never imagined my daily life would be reduced to such a meticulous, joyless accounting. At breakfast, when the family was all gathered at the table, I waited. I set aside my task of preparing George's meal until everyone else had finished eating. Then, I quietly warmed his oatmeal. Still, every morning Sarah would ask me, "Are you planning to use anything special today?" Her question made me wonder if it would just be better not to use anything at all. When I did need the kitchen, she would say, matter-of-factly, "We're about to clean up, so if you could wait until after we're done, that would be great." Of course, I'd say with a smile, but with each passing day, the small sadness in my heart grew a little larger. The days blurred into a routine of waiting for my turn, of worrying that I might inconvenience someone or use an appliance incorrectly. I never felt free to simply move about the house. George would sometimes grip my hand and ask, as if seeking reassurance, "This was the right thing to do, wasn't it?" "Of course it was," I'd tell him. "Being together is what's most important." But my own heart felt heavy as a stone. One day, I accidentally used a pinch of their salt. The next morning, a new note was taped to the refrigerator door, "Please manage your own seasonings." Every time I saw one of those notes, my chest tightened with the feeling that my very presence was an imposition on this family. At night, alone in my room, my mind would drift back to when I was young. I remembered George and me, dreaming about our future. "Wouldn't it be wonderful," we used to say, "to spend our old age with our children?" Now that dream had become a reality, but why did I feel so utterly alone? I remembered the words of a dear friend from back in Vermont. "You have to protect yourself in your old age, Evelyn," she had warned me. "If you move in with your children, never, ever hand everything over. Always keep the key to your own life, so you can stand on your own 2 feet if you have to." I had laughed at her then, thinking she was being overly dramatic. But now, I understood the painful truth in her words. I tried my best to be cheerful at the dinner table, to smile as the family chatted around me. But I could always feel a quiet distance, an invisible wall between us. No one ever asked about the old days or reminisced about shared memories. Not a single person asked me how I was feeling or how George was doing. I just sat there, a silent audience to the lively conversation of my son and his family. I never knew if it was my place to join in, so I often remained quiet, the words I wanted to say dissolving on my tongue. But the words would catch deep in my throat. I found myself sitting in the middle of this gathering they called family, feeling like a complete and utter stranger. The next day, I took George out for a short walk. I pushed his wheelchair along the sidewalk to a nearby park. The spring sun was gentle, casting a soft, warm light over everything, and the tulips in the flower beds swayed in the breeze. George looked up at the sky and murmured, "Evelyn, on a day like this, I wish we could be napping in the yard of our old house." I smiled down at him. "I know," I said. "The big dogwood tree in the yard, I bet it bloomed beautifully this year." On the way back from the park, I made a quiet vow to myself. No matter how much I feel like I'm in the way, I will do everything I can here. For George's sake, and for my own. But I will not surrender my entire life. I will not let it be taken from me. When we got back to the house, Sarah met us at the door. "Oh, Mom, you're back," she said. "Just so you know, you'll need to prepare your own lunches separately from now on." I just nodded. "I understand," was all I could manage to say. That evening, as I sat with my notebook, I thought back on the day, on just how much energy I had spent being considerate. How much I had worried about staying out of the way, about not being a bother. In this house, I wondered, am I truly family? That question was a seed of doubt that sprouted in the darkness, growing a little bigger in my heart each night. It was the morning of our third day living with them. George hadn't eaten much since the night before, and he seemed weak and listless. For a while now, solid foods like bread or rice had been difficult for him to swallow, and he'd been living mostly on oatmeal. That morning, I woke up before anyone else, the house still wrapped in a deep silence. I slipped out of bed and made my way to the kitchen as quietly as I could. I was going to make George some oatmeal. I measured out the oats with my hands, pouring them gently into a small saucepan. I added the water and turned the burner on low, stirring slowly. The only sound in the whole house was the soft scrape of the spoon against the bottom of the pot. I hope the smell doesn't bother anyone, I thought, a knot of anxiety tightening in my chest. I noticed my hand was trembling slightly. Even though I was sure I was the only one awake, I felt as if I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. The sound of the spoon turning in the pot seemed deafeningly loud. "Please," I whispered to the empty room, "let there not be any trouble." With that thought, I stood there, just watching the steam rise from the pot. The first light of morning began to filter through the kitchen window, catching the steam and spreading a faint warmth across the room, and for a moment, a little of that warmth touched my heart. If this helps George get even a little of his strength back, the thought filled me with a quiet sense of purpose. Just as the oatmeal was nearly ready, the kitchen door opened without a sound. It was Sarah. She came in and stood there, saying nothing, her eyes fixed on the pot in my hand. Her gaze was cool, almost clinical. After a moment, her eyes moved to my face, but her expression was a complete blank. There was no anger, no curiosity, nothing at all. I instinctively shrank back a little. Have I done something wrong? I asked myself. I had only been making oatmeal for my husband, but the heavy, oppressive silence in the room made me feel as if I had committed some terrible mistake. An unspoken pressure filled the kitchen, and all I could do was lower my gaze to the floor. "Just so you know," she said, her voice flat and even, "none of us eat oatmeal. So if you're going to make it, you need to be the one to clean everything up yourself." For a second, I felt my whole body go rigid. "Oh, yes, I understand," I managed to reply in a small voice. Keeping my eyes down, I carefully began to wash the pot and the spoon I had just used. When I slowly turned back around, Sarah was still standing there, watching me with that same blank expression. The oatmeal I had made with such care and love for my husband. It occurred to me. Then even that simple act might be seen as a nuisance by this family. The thought was like a sharp pain in my chest. I asked myself the question over and over again in my mind. Can a single bowl of oatmeal really be such a bother to someone? I wanted to explain. I wanted to say, it's because George can't eat solid food. But the words were stuck, trapped deep in my throat, and would not come out. A wave of sadness and confusion washed over me. I was afraid that if I said anything at all, the air in the room would only grow heavier. And so, I just stood there silently, my head bowed. My son, Michael, glanced over at me from the dining table. He looked like he wanted to say something, but in the end, he said nothing. He just lowered his head and continued moving the food around on his plate with his fork. My grandson, Leo, was sitting there too, eating his breakfast in silence. "It's all right," I whispered to myself. Acting as if nothing had happened, I carried the bowl of oatmeal to George's room. When George saw the oatmeal I brought, a faint smile touched his lips. "Thank you, Evelyn," he said. And then he added, "Your oatmeal is still the best." His words were a lifeline, but they were tangled with a complicated mix of guilt and sorrow. In this house, the thought came to me, unbidden. Even the simple things that were normal for us are not normal anymore. George must have seen it on my face. He didn't say anything but just looked at me, his expression full of a quiet concern and a deep helplessness. I could feel his unspoken emotions as keenly as if they were my own. After a moment, he gently reached out and took my hand in his. The warmth of his touch was the only thing that felt real. The only thing that seemed to be quietly telling me, "It's going to be okay." From that day on, I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller and smaller within the walls of that house. I learned to wait until the kitchen was empty before I dared to use it. I would ask in a small voice, "Is it all right if I use the washing machine now?" Every time I needed to do a load of laundry. With every small act, I was telling myself, "You must not be a burden to this family." In the evenings, I would sit in a chair in the corner of the living room, watching from a distance as the rest of the family gathered around the television, laughing together. I was just there, a silent observer, searching for a place where I belonged, but never finding a way into their circle of conversation. Occasionally, one of them would catch my eye, and they would quickly look away, a flicker of awkwardness on their face. The word family began to feel more and more distant, like a memory from a life I no longer lived. All I could do was quietly accept this new reality. At night, lying in bed, listening to the soft, rhythmic sound of George's breathing, I would ask myself, who am I in this house? Am I a mother? A grandmother? Or am I just a roommate? The anxiety and loneliness would coil in my heart. And yet, I believed that my purpose was to be by my husband's side. And so, I told myself that all I could do was continue to live each day as quietly as I could. The next morning, I made oatmeal again, but only after everyone else had finished with the kitchen. George whispered his quiet, "Thank you." My grandson looked at me again with those curious eyes, but said nothing before he left for school. I was slowly, painfully, coming to accept my new role, a member of the family who was not really part of the family at all. A week had passed since we'd moved in. That day, after I had finished taking care of George, I was sitting in the living room, writing in the little notebook I used to track our expenses. That was when Sarah silently approached and placed a piece of paper on the table in front of me. "Here are the receipts and a breakdown for this month's expenses," she said. "I've noted down everything: groceries, utilities, even things like toilet paper and detergent, all itemized. Please check it to make sure it's correct." I looked down at the paper. Each expense was listed in meticulous detail. Next to the line item for toilet paper, she had even written down how many rolls had been used and over how many days. For a moment, I was speechless. A coldness seeped into my heart. Am I being managed to this extent? I thought. "Thank you," I said, giving a small nod. I folded the paper and tucked it inside my notebook. Then, letting out a sigh so quiet I could barely hear it myself, I went back to George's room. Later that afternoon, I went to help George with his bath. Though his face rarely showed much emotion anymore, I could always see a look of relief wash over him whenever I was near. I was helping him as I always did, carefully washing him, helping him with his undergarments and pads. Suddenly, I heard Sarah's voice from just outside the bathroom door. "Mom!" she called out, and there was a sharp, undisguised irritation in her voice. "This isn't a hospital or a nursing home. You need to get this done as quickly as possible. I don't want the whole house getting damp and humid." Her words were filled with a clear frustration, a rejection of us, of the burden we represented. My hands froze. I felt my throat tighten. Had we become nothing more than a nuisance? The people who were supposed to be our family, did they now see us as just a problem to be managed? George must have seen the change in me immediately. He said nothing, but his eyes were fixed on my face, full of that same worried, less expression. I could feel his unspoken sorrow so intensely it was a physical ache. After a moment, he gently squeezed my hand. The warmth of his grip was his only way of telling me, "It's okay." I forced a smile. "It's all right," I whispered, but inside, my heart was screaming. How did it come to this? What can I do to be part of this family again? The afternoon sun streamed through the small bathroom window. and the light felt painfully, unnaturally bright. I fought back tears as I finished helping George get dressed. Then, as if nothing had happened, I walked back out into the living room. That night, the conversation around the dinner table was even more sparse than usual. The air was heavy, thick with unspoken things. Leo glanced over at us a couple of times but said nothing. He finished his meal quickly and disappeared into his room. Michael, too, excused himself early, claiming he was tired from work. Soon, it was just the three of us left at the table, me, George, and Sarah. Sarah began clearing the dishes without a word. I sat there silently, picking up my pen and dutifully recording the day's expenses in my notebook. If this continues, I thought, a deep fear growing inside me, we are going to lose our place in this home completely. Later that night, listening to George's steady breathing in the darkness, I clenched my own hands together. I cannot just let this happen, I told myself. We still have our dignity. We have to protect it. With that firm resolve in my heart, I lay awake for a long, sleepless night. As I lay there in the dark, I quietly reviewed the day in my mind. When I really thought about it, the cost of living here in Boston was so high. It couldn't be easy for Michael to support the entire family on his salary alone. Why is she so harsh? I asked myself, turning the question over and over. On top of their own expenses, there were our medical bills and the cost of all the supplies George needed. Managing the household budget must be incredibly difficult. And Sarah had her own job to worry about, on top of raising Leo, running the house, and now caring for us. Our moving in must have been an enormous burden for her. She must just be completely overwhelmed, I reasoned. She probably doesn't have any emotional energy left. And yet, even though I could understand it with my head, the sadness and loneliness in my heart would not go away. Was it really a nuisance to rely on them, even as family? With that heavy thought pressing down on me, I passed another sleepless night in silence. I barely slept at all that night. Even when I closed my eyes, a whirlwind of thoughts churned in my mind, and I kept asking myself the same questions again and again. If I just keep enduring this, will there be any pride or dignity left for us in the end? Is it really right to just swallow all of this and keep living this way? Or do I need to find the courage to take a stand right now, before I regret it for the rest of my life? As I wrestled with these questions, my mind drifted to the money we had saved, bit by bit, over our entire lives. The money George and I had scrimped and saved for, never wasting a penny, protecting it carefully for our future. It was the only thing I had left. My last resort, my last weapon. I made a vow right then, in the darkness of that room. I would use that money to defend our dignity, my husband's, and my own, one last time. When morning came, I finished helping George. Then I got myself dressed and ready. I asked everyone to gather in the living room. Michael and Sarah came and sat down, their faces tense with a nervous curiosity. Sarah, Michael, I began. I walked over to the old wooden dresser and opened a drawer. I took out the bank book and withdrawal slips I had guarded so carefully for so many years. If George and I are truly nothing but a burden in this house, I said, my voice surprisingly calm, then this is for you. It is our entire life savings. $350,000. I want us all to sit down today and decide, together, how this money should be used, whether it is for this family or for ourselves. In that moment, I felt a strange sense of peace, the fear of what my family would think of me, the worry that they would hate me. It had all mysteriously vanished. I knew with a deep certainty that if I allowed myself to lose my own self-respect, my own pride, then my spirit would die, even if my body continued to live on in this house. At the same time, I had prepared myself for the worst. I knew that if my son and his wife chose only the money, then I would take George, and we would quietly leave this house forever. It would be lonely, and it would be hard, but I believed it was the only way to protect our final shred of dignity. The small, worn bank book in my hand held the story of our lives. It represented decades of hard work, of dreams deferred, of small sacrifices made by me and my husband. $350,000, saved $1 at a time. I walked to the center of the living room, where my family was gathered, and I gently placed the bank book on the coffee table. This money, I said, looking at each of them in turn, is what your father and I have saved, little by little, ever since the day we were married. We put it away to pay for your education, to be ready for sickness or disaster. We never wasted a single penny of it. Even after we grew old and couldn't work as we used to, we kept saving, cutting back where we could. This book, it is the proof of our lives together. It holds all of our sweat, our tears, and all of our love for this family. I paused, my gaze resting on each of their faces. I need you to understand the weight of this money. And I need you to understand the weight of our feelings. My sudden declaration shattered the morning quiet. The air in the room instantly turned to ice. No one spoke. They just stared, first at my hands, and then at the bank book sitting on the table. If nothing is going to change, I said, my voice steady and clear, then I will take this money, and George and I will move into a nursing home. But if you are truly committed to living together as one family, then everyone here must be willing to accept the weight of this bank book, and the weight of our lives. The moment I finished speaking, the silence in the living room became absolute, a frozen, breathless quiet. Sarah's face had gone completely pale. Her eyes darted back and forth, as if searching for words that would not come. Her hands were clenched into tight fists in her lap. She looked like she wanted to argue, to say something in her own defense, but she seemed unable to form a single word. My son, Michael, simply lowered his head, staring down at the floor. I could see beads of sweat forming on his forehead. His shoulders, which had always seemed so broad and strong, were slumped in defeat. In the suffocating silence, my son's hand, trembling just slightly, reached for his wallet on the end table. He fumbled for a moment, his fingers clumsy, before pulling out his checkbook and a pen. He clicked the pen open, holding it poised over the blank paper, his jaw tight as he fought back tears. "From now on," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "no matter what happens, I promise I will support you and Dad. I will never, ever let you leave this house." His voice, which had been so quiet and distant for so long, was now filled with a strength and a gentleness I hadn't heard in years. Beside him, Sarah finally broke. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, and then another, until she was weeping openly, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She looked up at me, her eyes clouded with regret. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice choked. I've just been so overwhelmed. I've been so scared of everything. The bills, Leo's future, my job. I felt like I was drowning. But the thought of you and Dad not being here, I never, ever wanted that. I swear. That was the moment. The moment when every wall we had built around our hearts finally crumbled, and for the first time, we were all truly honest with each other. Tears welled in my own eyes and began to stream down my face, but as they fell, I felt a tiny, warm flicker of hope ignite deep within my soul. Sarah could not speak for a long while. She simply sat there, her head bowed, her hands covering her face as she cried. "I'm sorry too," she finally managed to say, her voice muffled. "I know I should have tried harder. I should have talked to you, really talked to you." In her words, I heard none of the coldness or irritation from the past few weeks. All that was left was a deep, genuine remorse. I looked around at my family, at their tear-streaked faces, and I slowly began to speak. "The only thing I have ever truly wanted," I said, my voice soft but clear, "is not your money. It is simply to be treated with love, like a mother. To have a place here, as part of this family. Not as a burden, or as some kind of business transaction, but as a person, welcomed with warmth and respect. That is all I have ever asked for." I gently touched the cover of the old bank book. "This money, I want to be able to leave it to you, to all of you, with a happy and peaceful heart. I want to entrust it to a family that truly cares for one another. A family that supports each other unconditionally. Please, I am asking you to be a family that is bound together by love, not by duty. As I spoke those final words, a profound sense of relief washed over me, and the tiny flicker of hope in my heart grew into a warm, steady light. The instant I finished speaking, my grandson, Leo, shot up from the couch and ran to me. He threw his small arms around my waist and hugged me with all his might. "Grandma, I'm so sorry. Please stay with us forever," he cried, his face buried in my dress. The warmth of his little body, the earnestness in his voice, it was a balm to my wounded heart, wrapping around me like the softest blanket. The rest of the family was speechless. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the sound of quiet weeping. Then, slowly, tentatively, the words began to come. A jumble of "I'm sorries" and "thank yous" filled the air, the sounds overlapping, mingling with the tears. And with each word, I could feel the pain and misunderstanding of the past. Weeks beginning to dissolve, washed away by a tide of shared grief and newfound understanding. George reached for my hand and squeezed it tightly. He gave me a slow, deliberate nod, his eyes shining with relief and joy. I wiped away my own tears and managed a small smile back at him. The warmth of my family, the bond that we had finally, painstakingly, reclaimed in that moment, that was the most precious treasure in the world. A little while later, after the storm of emotion had passed, Sarah came and sat on the floor in front of my chair. Her eyes were still red from crying. "Mom," she began, her voice quiet and fragile, "I am so sorry. I was just so wrapped up in my own problems that I couldn't find it in myself to be kind. I felt like I was carrying the weight of everything on my shoulders, the mortgage, Leo's school, my job, all of it. And somewhere along the way, I lost the ability to think about how you and Dad must have been feeling." I gently took her hand in mine. "It must have been so hard for you," I said, my voice full of a sympathy I hadn't been able to feel before. "I know you were only trying to do your best for your family. But from now on, please don't try to carry it all by yourself. You can talk to us. You can ask for help." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes again. "I will," she whispered. "Thank you so much. I want us to start over. All of us, together." A wave of pure relief washed over me. "We will," I said, squeezing her hand. "From now on, we'll all help each other." And in that moment, I felt the invisible wall that had stood between us for so long simply vanish, melting away into nothing. Everyone in the room seemed to take a deep, collective breath, as if we were all emerging from underwater. The tension was gone, replaced by a quiet, thoughtful stillness. Money is important, of course it is. But the will to live together as a family, the compassion to care for one another, that is the only foundation that truly matters. I believed that with every fiber of my being. George squeezed my hand again. "It's going to be okay," he murmured, a faint smile on his lips. Looking at his face, at the faces of my son and his wife and my grandson, I knew that I could finally move forward. In the days that followed that emotional morning, small but significant changes began to ripple through our family. Word of what had happened eventually reached other relatives, and a few days later, my sister-in-law, George's younger sister, called me from her home in Florida. Her voice was firm and clear over the phone. "Evelyn," she said, "I just have one question for Sarah. How would she feel if she were in your shoes? After dedicating your entire life to your family, to then be handed a bill for your meals? I just can't wrap my head around it." Other relatives sent messages of support. "Evelyn, we're thinking of you. Please don't push yourself too hard." When I mentioned these calls to Sarah, she fell silent for a long time. I hadn't intended for her to feel guilty, but I was touched and warmed to know that so many people were looking out for us, that we were not alone. I didn't have to say anything else. Just knowing that others were thinking of us spread a gentle warmth through me. In the week that followed, Sarah was subdued and withdrawn. She moved about the house quietly, speaking only when necessary, and seemed to avoid making eye contact with me. I would often see her sitting by herself in the living room, lost in thought. Then, one evening, there was a soft knock on my bedroom door. Sarah pushed it open gently. She was holding a small tray with a steaming mug of tea on it. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling slightly as she set the tray on my nightstand. "About the other day, I am truly so sorry." She kept her eyes fixed on the floor. "I want to try again," she said in a small, quiet voice. "I really want us to make this work." I just nodded, my heart too full for many words. "Thank you," I whispered. And in that moment, I felt the distance that had separated us shrink just a little more. From that day forward, the atmosphere in our home began to shift, slowly but surely. At the dinner table, someone would naturally ask, "So, how was your day?" I noticed Michael or Sarah would quietly put a spoonful of vegetables onto my plate without me having to ask. Leo started telling me all about his day at school, about his friends and his teachers, his words tumbling out in an excited rush. He no longer averted his eyes or hurried off to his room the moment he finished eating. Before I knew it, laughter and easy conversation had returned to our dinner table. The heavy, oppressive silence that had lingered in the house for so long was slowly, finally, beginning to melt away. To make sure life was manageable for everyone, I gently made a suggestion. "Why don't we all sit down and figure out a way to share the chores and the caregiving?" We worked out a schedule based on everyone's strengths and availability. We divided up the laundry, the cleaning, the grocery shopping, making a conscious effort to ensure that no single person was shouldering the entire burden. I also took charge of the household finances. I bought a simple accounting ledger and began to keep a detailed record of all our expenses. I left the ledger on a table in the living room, where anyone could look at it whenever they wanted. This way, there would be no room for suspicion or misunderstanding. I realized that for us to rebuild our trust, everything needed to be open and honest. This simple change made a world of difference. The air in the house grew lighter. Sarah stopped micromanaging every little thing, and she no longer hovered over me and George, watching our every move. It was as if she had finally begun to see us, not as a problem, but as her family. Michael, too, started to change. He began to actively help with his father's care. Before, he would often use his long hours at work as an excuse to leave everything to Sarah, but now, no matter how late he came home, he would always stop by his father's room. "Anything I can help with?" he'd ask me, his voice gentle. For my part, I decided to take a step that was for my own well-being as much as it was for the family's. I hired a part-time home health aide to come in for a few hours each day. This shared the load of the physical caregiving and gave me a much-needed break, a little room to breathe. I continued to meticulously log every expense in my notebook, from the aide's salary to the cost of groceries. If we're all clear about where the money is going, I thought, there won't be any reason for resentment to build up again. I was committed to keeping things transparent. The heavy silence and strained tension that had once filled our home was gone. In its place, you could hear the soft sounds of people caring for one another. You could see the return of gentle smiles. Whenever George saw me looking peaceful and content, a small, relieved smile would appear on his own face. His spirits lifted too. His expression grew brighter, and he started taking more initiative in his own recovery. "I think I'll try to do my physical therapy exercises today," he would say, asking Michael or Leo to help him. Those moments, all of us gathered in his room, doing simple stretches together, or listening to him tell stories from his youth, became a cherished part of our daily routine. I also found that I was no longer just the person being cared for. I was once again a valued member of the family. They started asking for my opinion on things, consulting me about meal plans, or asking for my advice on small household matters. I began to feel my own sense of worth returning. The feeling of being needed by my family was the most powerful medicine of all. It lightened my heart and gave me new strength for each day. One evening, as I was sitting in my armchair reading, Leo came and quietly rested his head on my lap. "Grandma," he whispered, "please stay with us forever." In that moment, I knew, with a certainty that filled my entire being, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. To have been given this second chance to rebuild our family bonds in the twilight of my life. It was the greatest gift the greatest blessing I could have ever asked for. Of course, I know our lives won't be free of problems from now on. But I believe that as long as we continue to listen to each other, to respect one another, this house will remain a place of warmth and love. Sometimes, as I sit quietly and watch my family move about the house, I think back on everything that happened, the misunderstandings, the tears, and finally, the reconciliation. And a strange sense of gratitude washes over me. If we hadn't gone through that terrible storm, I don't think we ever would have learned how to truly understand or forgive one another. Happiness, I've learned, is not something that can be bought with money or possessions. The things that truly matter are a compassionate heart and the strength to forgive. I hold that truth close now, savoring it quietly. Even after our lives settled into this new, calmer rhythm, I never expected a return to some kind of perfect happiness or the ideal family. But I had something just as precious, my own dignity, and the quiet warmth of our daily life together. Every morning, I go to the kitchen and make breakfast for myself and for George. Sometimes it's just a simple piece of toast. Other times, I'll take my time and make a pot of the chicken noodle soup he used to love so much when he was younger. Even with the daily demands of caregiving and housework, I find strength in doing what I can for myself. I watch over George, help him with his meals, and cherish the quiet moments we have together. And now, when my family offers to help, I have learned to accept their kindness with a simple, heartfelt, thank you. In the evenings, Leo often tiptoes into my room. "Grandma, will you tell me a story tonight?" he'll ask. Curling up and resting his head in my lap, his presence is the sweetest comfort. I tell him old folk tales, stories from my own youth, and little anecdotes about our family's history. Sometimes he'll look up at me with his curious eyes and ask, "Grandma, how did you get through all the hard times?" And every time, I give him the same answer. Family, I tell him, is not a place for keeping score or worrying about who owes what. It's a place where we help each other and share in all the joys and all the sorrows. No matter how difficult things get, as long as you never forget to be kind and grateful, there will always be a way to connect with each other again. Please, my dear boy, always remember that. He nods seriously. "Grandma," he whispers, "stay with us forever." And I always smile and stroke his hair. "I'll be right here, sweetheart, for as long as I possibly can." Outside my window, the lights of Boston glitter against the night sky, the same as they do every night. But inside this house, a quiet peace and a gentle warmth have finally returned. I am so grateful to be here. Life may not always be smooth sailing, but to be able to share your heart with others, to respect them, and be respected in return, to say thank you, and to hear it said back to you, that, I now know, is what a real family truly is. I would like to ask all of you listening to my story, have you ever witnessed a situation where an elderly person, even within their own family, was treated like a tenant? Their every meal and expense meticulously calculated? If this story resonates with you in any way, I would be so grateful if you would leave a comment and simply write, "I will never treat my parents like payers in my own home." And if you have taken anything at all from my experience, please remember this. While money can buy many things, it can never buy gratitude or respect. If my story has touched even one heart, and perhaps inspired someone to think more deeply about their own family, then I could not be happier. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my story.